Hi everyone, so this is just a very quick night before news video to show you the key content coming up for your paper 1 exam. I'm going to give you a couple of top tips of what I would revise. If you're looking at this tonight and you're thinking, oh, I really haven't done much revision yet, then please make sure you listen to what I'm about to say and you do some of the quick practices, which will really help you to get a good grade in this mock exam on Monday. So this sheet is basically showing you all of the content that can come up. The first slide showed you the key subject areas. So there are 3 sections to the paper. Each section is worth 30 marks each. One of the 8 markers will have 4 marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar. So it's important that you obviously work really hard on that one to make sure your spelling's great and your geographical terminology. So the total paper's out of 94 marks. So the content is split into 3 equal sections: hazards, then development, then urbanisation. We've already told you in class that the 8 marker in hazards will be on climate change. The 8 marker in section B will be on India, and the 8 marker in section C will be on Lagos. So it's really important that first of all you look at the specific pages listed here. If any of these are red knowledge for you, then I would look at those first, but then mainly focus your time and energy on revising those case studies so you can get some decent marks on the 8 markers. for your climate change 8 marker, you're going to need to revise these pages. You need to know the natural causes of climate change, human causes of climate change, and also you need to know a bit about climate change in the future and predictions and projections. So make sure you've read these pages and you know some specific facts you could use for an 8 mark essay. I've included some practice 8 markers after each of the key topics. And for revision, I would just suggest you look at each question. You don't even have to fill this in or write it in. It's just considering, would you know what the 2 paragraphs are for these 8 mark questions? Remember, if your target grade is a 4, really we want you to write one really good paragraph 1. So you'd be saying the most significant factor is, tell us what it is. For example, this is your knowledge, give me a specific fact. This means that, and as a result. And as long as you use those sentence starters and that structure on a really good paragraph, you're going to hopefully get 3 or 4 out of 8. And if you do that consistently through the paper, you'll easily get your grade 4. If your target grade is a 5+, you want to be including a second paragraph. If your target grade is a 7, 8 or 9, you definitely want to include a conclusion on the end, where you talk about overall the most significant factor is, and you talk about maybe the thing that lasts the longest or has the biggest impact or has the most long-term impact or has a global impact or a social, economic, environmental impact. PLC on this sheet just stands for place, location or context, and it's just reminding you that we need to try and give specific facts when we use our knowledge. So rather than just saying sea level rise, for example, in question 1 for our knowledge, we'd say sea level is set to rise by 2 centimetres by the year 2100. That's then place, location or context. It's specific. It's not just a vague idea. So try some of these yourself. Okay, so for section B on development, you've got the India case study. You can see here the 3 pages that appear in the CGP guide. Hopefully you've been using flashcards anyway, because there's quite a lot of information on here, but I'm just going to give you some really brief ideas and understanding about India. So India is located in South Asia. It is now the most populated country in the world as of 2024. It overtook China. India used to be colonised by the British Empire. That means the British Empire used to exploit India for trading goods such as tea and sugarcane. And India gained independence in 1947. So just after World War II, India gained independence. That means that they are running their own country and they have a democratic government. So people get to vote for who they want to be in charge. This has kind of helped the country to progress quite rapidly. The government's brought in different policies, government policy, to try and help the country improve, such as in the 1980s, bringing in free education for all primary school children. And the second government policy they brought in is reducing tariffs. Tariffs are taxes paid on imports and exports, and that encouraged lots of FDI, which means foreign direct investment, from big TNCs such as BT, which is British Telecom Operating, and Coca-Cola, for example. They wanted to come to India to set up their companies because they knew there's lots of hard-working, middle-aged people to be able to work for them, and so they can gain more profit. And this has really helped India's economy to grow. Those are formal jobs that people are given with a contract and taxes being paid to the government. However, some people still do informal work if they've maybe not had such a great education. It's led to a big divide between the rural and the urban. So in rural areas such as Bihar, they haven't had that investment from companies. And lots of the people who want jobs have left the rural areas and they've gone to the urban Maharashtra, which leads to something called a brain drain in the rural areas. So the rural areas are full of older people who aren't able to work anymore, some farming communities, but lots of those farming communities have mechanised now. They've got tractors, so they don't need lots of farming jobs. So people have left the rural, they've moved to the city, and in the city areas they have a better quality of life. It's increased their education. The government's reinvested into things like hospitals, healthcare's much better, and we can see on here that the Human Development Index, GDP is much higher in the cities, the literacy rate's higher in the cities, and the life expectancy is higher. So there's quite a big divide between the two. There's some benefits and there's some negatives about that investment and globalization aspects. So it's brought in more jobs for people and they're of a higher wage. However, some negatives are particularly around things like the environment. There's been lots of environmental damage, water pollution, air pollution, noise pollution from that increase in secondary industry. And also business owners in India have lost out a little bit because now the workers they used to have want to work in the TNCs. So small companies have lost a lot of money. However, globally, lots of countries rely on India for trade. They're part of the G20, which is a group of countries that come together to make about global decisions. They trade a lot of goods to the USA and have good connections with them. And surrounding areas also use the Indian Ocean and the Suez Canal to try and get exports across to Europe. So that's that case study in a nutshell, but have a little look at it on your own if any of that did not make sense. So the final case study that you need for section C of the exam paper is the Lagos case study, and as you can see this is also really clearly displayed in your CGP guide. I'm just going to give you some really quick facts to remember. You might want to pause the video or make some notes on these. So Lagos is a city in Nigeria. It's not actually the capital city. The capital city is called Abuja, but Lagos is the primate city. That means it has more than double the population of Abuja. And one of the key reasons why it's grown so quickly is, as you can see on that map there on the top left, it's close to the Atlantic Ocean. So it grew up as a kind of fishing port, but over time it's really increased its capacity and the amount of people living there because of the amount of trade and imports and exports. And Nigeria imports and exports at a global scale. Nigeria is one of the mint countries, so it's an emerging country behind the BRICS, so that means it's kind of behind India, but they are rapidly industrializing. That means they're getting lots more secondary industry and their economy is growing really quickly. Nigeria also is quite abundant in oil, and you'll remember from year 9 we looked at Shell locating in Nigeria. Shell is a TNC, and lots of TNCs, transnational companies, have set up in Nigeria. They're attracted because of the low-cost workforce. So the people there, they can pay them a relatively low wage and make high profits. You need to know mainly, though, about the city and how it's changing over time and the challenges that that creates for different groups of people. So in the city, you've got the CBD, the inner city, the suburbs, and the rural-urban fringe. And on the bottom left, you can see there that the CBD is called Lagos Island. It's high-rise offices, the most oldest part, very expensive part of the city. The inner city, you've got 2 residential areas, Mushin and Ojo. And they are quite polluted. It's quite congested there as well, as they're so close to the CBD. The suburbs, you've got Victoria Island, where you can find more semi-detached houses on larger plots of land. And in the rural urban fringe, you've got a place called Lekki. So it's more industrial because it's located closer to the port, which is found at the mouth of Lagos Lagoon. Now, the city, in terms of its location, has a few good things and bad things. The good things are that it's located close to the Atlantic for trade that we've already talked about. You could also say the city is a nodal point, which means there's lots of different aspects of transport meet in this central place. But one of the biggest challenges that they face is there's only one main road in and out of Lagos, and this leads to really high congestion times. It can take up to 4 hours to commute from one side of the city to the other during rush hour. And you can see that on the right-hand side, the population's growing rapidly due to a huge amount of people migrating into the city. We call that urbanisation from surrounding rural areas. Lots of the rural areas have now mechanised, and therefore they don't need lots of farmers. Other parts of Nigeria are also quite dry, and drought is a real problem. Whereas by moving to the city, people move there for a better quality of life. They want to have better job opportunities, and wages in the city are 4 times higher than surrounding rural areas. Even if you live in a place like Makoko, that's still going to be a better salary than if you live in a rural farming community.
People also move there because of the opportunities it provides. For example, there's now 6 universities across the city, there's higher education in primary and secondary, although people do still have to pay for education in the city of Lagos. You've got people that are starting to live in areas where there's more jobs available in the secondary sector, and these are often formal jobs with a contract. However, some people move to the city, and a big challenge they face is they don't have the education to do those formal jobs, so they set up informal work. Things like polishing shoes, for example. And the government don't really like this very much because actually those people don't pay tax. They keep the money to themselves. The hours are quite unreliable and the pay's unreliable as well. But many of the people living in Makoko, they've settled there because they can't afford to live in the main part of the city, and so they do an informal job, like fishing or collecting rubbish, for example. And that's a big political challenge for the government, trying to manage both the informal illegal settlement of Makoko, where they could be using that land for something else, but also all these informal workers who aren't paying any taxes. So the government's tried to destroy parts of Makoko, and they've invested instead in places like Eco Atlantic, where they've dredged sand from the seabed to make new land, and it's going to be the new financial hub of Africa, not just Nigeria. It's going to bring in people from all around the world, and 2,000 people arrive every single day in Lagos looking for jobs and opportunities. Some of those people will be rural farmers, but they'll also be international migrants from places like the USA and the UK who are looking for high-power financial jobs in the quaternary sector. This leads to lots of problems. Problems around inequality in terms of quality of life, lots of issues around traffic congestion that we've already talked about, and so they've tried to use a top-down development strategy called the Lagos Light Railway to improve transport times. But a problem with that is only the rich can afford to use it. They've also tried doing things like bottom-up approaches, which are run by NGOs. For example, Makoko Floating School, which was built to try and make education free and accessible for Makoko students, and also the Owando Foundation, a charity who have been trying to fix up schools in Lagos so that other children can have access to that basic human right of education. The government have done another top-down strategy, which is the waste disposal. They've invested heavily in new trucks, and now 2,000 trucks patrol the Lagos streets every day collecting rubbish. There's big inequalities in Lagos between the rich and the poor. The very poorest people live in inequality rich places like, for example, Makoko, whereas the richer people will live in places like Victoria Island and Banana Island, and their lifestyles will be very different. So the government's trying to make the city more sustainable, and if the government try to do something, that's called top-down development, and local charities and local people doing things, that's called bottom-up development. However, often those things lead to conflict. Not always do the government listen to what the local people want. For example, the government want to destroy Makoko, but obviously a Makoko resident will say, well, where else am I supposed to live? I can't afford housing in the city. And the government isn't looking yet to build any housing that's available for them.
Okay, so this one has one question here with some writing in red. It's just showing you that on that question it would only be name the challenges, or it would be name the opportunities. So you just need to make sure you know 2 challenges faced in Lagos and 2 opportunities faced in Lagos. It would never be both challenges and opportunities in the same 8 marker. So give these a try.
Okay, so this one, you've been practicing this a lot in class on the planning grids, and also you're being sent home and some of you have been given the practice paper. Even if you're running out of time to do that practice paper and to do the shorter questions, I would definitely spend some time planning the 8 markers. I've had a few groups of students for revision now, and I've told them, even if you write a good plan, you write P1, what you'd write about, P2, what you'd write about, and your conclusion, the examiner can still mark that, and you can gain up to 3 marks just for writing a really good plan. So even if you're running out of time, please make sure you plan it. The second thing I would say is that in order to get that grade 4 or 5, you need to talk about significance. It must have a conclusion on the end that says, overall, the most significant factor is. It doesn't matter which one you choose, as long as you argue why one of the things you've talked about is more significant or more important or more effective than the other. For those of you with target grade of 6+, you need to do a little mini assess on the end of each paragraph that you do. So you should add, this is the most significant factor, as shown on the screen here. And you need to try and talk about things like, as it's a long-term solution, as it's a large-scale solution. If you're talking about sustainability, tell me which type. Is it economically sustainable, socially or environmentally? You can also talk about your thing having an impact at a local, national or global scale. Obviously, the bigger and the greater the impact, the more significant that thing is. And you want to make sure that you do that in your little paragraphs and then write a really decent conclusion on the end, really weighing up the 2 things you've talked about. What's most important for this exam is that you leave enough time for these 8 markers for some really solid planning and writing some great conclusions on the end. Never leave an 8 marker blank. Even if you have to bullet point something down, write something. Even if you forget your facts, write something. It doesn't matter as long as there's something written down, because these are worth 28 marks in total. One of them will have spag marks as well, and that's for spelling, punctuation, grammar and keywords from the geography course. Okay, so here's some final top tips for you. Just have a little look at those and make sure you're confident in what you're going to do on this paper 1 exam. Think about if you're going to do the 8 markers first, or are you just going to do the paper in the order that it arrives. Remember, the short questions will be at the beginning of each section. It's also really important that you don't write anywhere past the line on the paper. So where it says the marks and it tells you the total, if you then get to that point, you need to ask for a new piece of paper. Otherwise, the computer, when they do the marking, won't scan it. So all that writing you do after the line won't count. Make sure you don't forget that.
So the final thing to mention, now you've watched that video, is what you can do next. My top tips would be to look at the case studies that we've talked about today and have a look at some of those 8-mark questions and just plan what you would talk about for each of the paragraphs. Or if your target grades are 4, what would your really good paragraph 1 look like? And the last thing that I'd suggest you do is using your revision guide, which I know you've all got at home now. There are some topic tests which are really, really handy. They are on page 20 for hazards, 32 for development and 43 for urbanising world. And I would just look at these questions and answer them out loud and tick them off as you go through them. And that will mean then that you've covered all of the content that could possibly come up in this mock exam. Good luck!